What's up, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of Method in the Madness with me, Gregor Matheson. This is the podcast that not only delves deep into design and creativity, but leadership, productivity, and personal development too. And my first ever guest on the show is a gentleman named Don Smith. And Don is an inventor. However, prior to becoming an inventor, Don worked in the creative industry for 20 plus years as a creative director. And I wanted Don to be the first guest on the show for a few different reasons. Firstly, Don was one of my creative directors in the past, and since then he's been a mentor of mine for years now. But secondly, I thought Don's experience both as a creative director and now an inventor, his processes, his philosophies, as well as some of our other interests that we share outside of the creative world would be a fantastic way to kind of set the tone for the podcast and the array of subjects that I would like to cover on the show. We had a really great conversation about a variety of different things, but we mainly kind of cover his invention, obviously, what it is, and believe me, it's a good one. How he arrived at the idea, as well as the processes and the struggles involved in being an inventor. We cover our interest in modern day philosophers and why we both think it's important to be interested in things outside of your field of work. We chat about, what we wanted to be when we grew up and that moment that we knew we wanted to work in the creative industry, which is quite funny. And Don also has a pretty amusing story about his experience doing a TEDx talk, which I'll let him explain in a little bit. I also just wanted to point out that as this was the first episode, I'm more than happy to say there's definitely a nervousness on my part. Podcasting and just talking into a microphone is a new experience for me, and kind of putting yourself out there like this can be pretty nerve-wracking. So, don't get me wrong, Don and I had a great conversation, but I do think my nervousness resulted in me struggling to find my words at times, and I stumbled a little bit. So that's definitely one to work on for sure. But anyway, onwards and upwards. Please bear with me as we have many more awesome guests lined up, so stay tuned. And without much further ado, please welcome Don Smith to Method in the Madness. So Don, firstly, thank you for coming on the podcast and being the very first episode of Method in the Madness for a variety of reasons that you know of. Obviously, you've been my creative director and a mentor of mine for a few years now, but I think you're also one of the kind of perfect kind of cross sections of the kind of guests that I want to get on the podcast, kind of like we were discussing on the phone earlier, because you have not only the creative career, you've got another interesting career, which we'll discuss in a second, but you also have a variety of kind of different interests that, productivity and kind of philosophy wise, that I think will be kind of good to kind of dig into. But to kind of kick off, you have invented dry powder pulmonary, am I saying that right?
Pulmonary or respiratory
inhaler. What is that? What does that mean? And how the hell did that come around?
I know it's a bit of a leap from being a creative director in a digital agency to being I always tell people I'm a life scientist now. So which I think gives me remit to talk about any subject in that whole arena, even if I'm entirely unqualified. So I designed. Well, let's go back a bit. Since childhood, I had mild asthma. Was always the kid lagging behind on the running field, and as a result of having mild asthma, I always had to carry it's called a PMDI, a pressurized multi-dose inhaler. You'll have seen the little blue. Everyone knows it. Yeah. So that contains a pressurized wet mist drug. The drug's called salbutamol. Ventolin is one of the brand names, and it's a life-saving device, but it's 50-year-old technology. And I always had to carry it. My whole life I've had to carry it just in case. And that creates a certain sort of anxiety in you when you only have one inhaler, which is what they prescribe every time. You're always conscious, have I got my inhaler? Have I got my inhaler? And that's quite an anxiety to carry, especially as a kid. So that always frustrated me. And I always knew that the inhaler contains around 200 doses of the drug. And actually, when you have an attack, you only ever need one dose. So it's a bulky thing. It carried multiple doses, and I only ever needed one. So I guess I can't even tell you when this idea really occurred, but I know it's been in my mind for a long time. The idea of having a flat inhaler that just sits in your wallet. And I think it was probably when I was maybe 18, 19, you know, when you get your first wallet and you kind of, I've got my wallet, my keys, I can go out now. And I thought, wouldn't it be better to have something that went in my wallet rather than carry my inhaler? So anyway, the years passed. And at some point, I actually think that one of the triggers was I was at an awards event, and all I had as a portability device was my little sporran. And my inhaler was about 5 mil too thick to allow the sporran to close correctly. So I left it in the hotel room and went, the anxiety I had that whole night because I couldn't carry my inhaler. And this idea had been floating around in my mind for a while of taking 2 business cards, 2 sort of, it wouldn't be made of card, we'd be made of a polymer, a sort of a bioavailable substrate, as you would say. Put 2 of them together, seal up the edges, and if you squeezed them, imagine squeezing 2 business cards, you'd form a little tunnel. You would form an oval tunnel. And I thought, if I can use that tunnel as the method to place a drug within that space and have an airflow suck and release that drug off into the airflow, that would be kind of cool. That was the embryo of it. And then a few years back, I was given a new type of inhaler where instead of the wet mist that was contained in the original PMDI, it contained a very finely milled dry powdered dose of the drug. Now, if you've ever seen a very tiny amount of white powder, some people in the creative industry are familiar with that. But this is even finer and smaller amount than you'd be used to. And each dose of the drug, when people take an inhaler, it usually takes 2 squeezes to deliver a dose. With dry powders, you just breathe 1. And it's a very fine amount. The powders are so small, they're about 4 or 5 microns in size, which means that when you breathe it and it goes into your lungs through your natural flow of your breath, it deposits in your lungs, moves through the lungs and into the bloodstream very quickly. Right. So we've gone from this wet mist approach to delivering drugs, which forces you to have big bulky devices, to dry powders. And that's a huge paradigm shift in drug delivery. And I only found out about this as a result of getting my new inhaler. So I thought, well, if it's a dry powder, why can't I sit that small amount of drug on a foldable membrane, put it inside that tunnel device that's the size of a business card, and when you open it and you breathe, it lifts the drug off the filter into your lungs. Effectively, the reverse of the way a standard filter would work. If you imagine putting a filter over your mouth to prevent particles going in, the drug, as you breathe, the filter catches the particles. If you turn that around and breathe, effectively the particles lift off the filter and in. Yeah. So it's a very simple concept, and of course I designed that, and I thought, well, that's brilliant, because you know me, I can every idea. It's amazing, that's brilliant. But I had to then validate that would work. So I went and I just jumped on a plane to a respiratory conference in Istanbul. As you do. And I turned up and met all these respiratory pharmacologists, and I said, hey, I've invented an inhaler, and here's how it works.
Was that not quite dangerous at that time in case someone stole the idea? No?
I'd started doing the patent work, and I didn't tell them the full concept. I want to understand the nature of the dry powder drugs, and I want to understand how it was delivered to the lungs through other types of devices. So I was I was stealing a bit of knowledge to understand how I would develop my device. Right. But what was amazing was that almost everyone I spoke to, and I explained my theory, they didn't say, you can't do that, which is what I expected. I expected all these scientists to go, don't be ridiculous. Yeah. You know about typography. What the hell are you doing here? But actually they said, you've got a really good idea there. So that gave me the confidence to pursue it. But what I also found out was that it wasn't just the drug for asthma that was available. All these other drugs are available as well, or being developed as dry powders, because the processes for milling and spray drying drugs as dry powders have advanced hugely over the course of the last decade. So there are other drugs that will be available to put into an inhaler of that nature. And the thing that really inspired me was that there's a number of vaccinations, like the measles vaccine and the polio vaccine, have all been developed as dry inhalable powders.
Wow.
Now, if I've got a flat inhaler that is really simple to use and can put things like vaccinations in it, I can distribute that all the way around the world without the need for liquid-held drugs that require, first of all, a clinician to deliver them, and secondly, refrigeration to keep them stable.
Right, okay.
So this whole world opened up in front of me. And so I ran back and patented my idea as fast as possible, because I thought, well, do you know what? I need to sort this out. Patented it, developed the business, brought in consultants, brought in my commercial director partner, who's, you know me, I'm not the most administratively kind of brilliant guy. So my commercial director, Lisa, is just phenomenal, has added so much to the business. Then again, it's a fascinating story. We as marketing people, we took that story, took it to Scottish Enterprise, and they said, well, wow, that's great. And they've put us on their high growth ventures portfolio.
Wow.
They've given us grant funding to help to develop the product itself, to do all the initial feasibility study. And so right now it's, I've got two streams working on it, the mechanical engineering of the body of it and the pharmacology of the drug lifting off the membrane into the lung. And within the next few months, I'll have my first clinical data. It's going to prove it works, because I have to be confident, right? But it just will. And so suddenly, from that tiny little embryonic idea, and a little bit of the balls to go out there and just try it, I have a functioning life sciences business that, in theory, over the course of the coming months and years, will turn into probably a multi-million-pound licensing business. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I went.
Yeah, no, that answers it absolutely spot on.
It's not a simple story.
How, I just my tiny brain struggles with the jump between being a creative director for so long and then deciding to become an inventor. Like, what comes first? Like, the idea of being an inventor and then just going, you know what, I feel like I've got the confidence to come up with something, or the inventive idea. Okay.
Well, I've been a creative director. Probably I've got a few more years on you. So I've spent a lot of my life as a creative director. I think I'm quite a unique creative director. I think you are too, actually, because you're very much a polymath who is interested in far more than just the subject matter that surrounds being a creative director in design, marketing, digital. So when you have all those influences, you start to be able to connect them together in different ways. And fundamentally, the processes that we go through as creatives is one of taking the explicit knowledge that we take in. Quite often that's the brief, multitude of various needs and requirements that you have to take together, distill, simplify, hypothesize, and pull together as a solution. Now, that's all inventing really is. You're taking, I have a model for this. I call it the Inventure model, because it really is about creating a pressure, taking a massive amount of knowledge, using your brain power to understand that knowledge and connect it together in new ways, having a hypothesis, which is the real pressurized, simple thing that often takes very little time because you've done all the effort at the beginning. And then once you've had that hypothesis, you really need to validate it and execute it. And that's critical, because it's like, we love having ideas. That's a great fun bit. But unless you prove it works and unless you do something with it, it's
worthless unless it actually comes to fruition in some shape or form.
Exactly. So to answer your question, I've always been an inventor. You're an inventor. We've learned through the process of having to solve problems how to invent. And so my inhaler idea, to me, is no different than a client bringing me a brief or a problem they require solving and going through the same process. It's just that in this case, the output was the embryo of the concept. It wasn't to wrap around a solution on a concept that had already existed, which is kind of what we do as agency
Yeah,
people. The client has a
definitely.
business, they've had a hypothesis, they've started it from their concept. We usually wrap around solutions and creativity on that, whether it be the brand, the packaging, the marketing, the digital, the sales strategy, anything else we wrap around. But the core concept is almost always an invention.
Okay, so with that in mind, then,
Mm-hmm.
when was the tipping point that you decided to kind of act upon that nugget of an idea? Like, you obviously said that when you're 19 years old, you're like, oh, I could really do with like a credit card sized inhaler.
Yep.
What was the kind of moment you're like, you know what, now's the time for me to kind of pursue this rather than 10 years ago or 10
Yeah.
years in the future, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, much of it, I don't want to seem ungrateful. I've had an amazing career. I mean, I've done so much and seen the world and had met so many great people and worked in so many different industries and developed concepts and been able to design. I'm so grateful for the career I had. But the value I created as a creative usually manifested for the clients or the businesses that I worked for. It didn't manifest for me. I got paid a salary to be a creative. I got paid a salary to have ideas. My ideas were effectively sold by the companies I worked for on the time it took to have the idea rather than the deeper value of the concept.
Yeah, sure.
And that began to frustrate me. I had to go through that process to really understand that. But what I knew was that there was value in my ideas above and beyond the hours, days, weeks it took to have the ideas, and I wanted to manifest that value for myself. And I fundamentally believe that all creative people can and should, but it's because we're relatively risk-averse people naturally that we're more inclined to find a comfortable space in which to be creative. Now that's almost a contradiction, because to be creative is all about taking risks, but pure risk-taking, making that massive leap to start your own business, develop your own concept, do all the work around that, take it into the world, hope it flops. There is so much anxiety around doing that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, my confidence that I could do it was born of having done it for nearly 20 years for other people. I mean, the work that you and I have done over the years, we've solved people's problems. We've executed those problems, and they've become successful in their own right, and they've delivered.
Yeah, effectively.
So that requires a whole new set of disciplines and a certain maturity that perhaps I didn't always have throughout the course of my career. So,
it's different when there's not, I suppose, a regular pay slip coming in each month, and it's now all on you that I need to get this going as fast as possible, but as successfully as not cutting corners and things like that as well, because it's not that we should be cutting corners at work, but obviously things happen in the day-to-day course of your kind of workplace life. But when it's your own baby and your own business and your own invention, which is even more unique, then you kind of need to be apply far more rigor to it, I can imagine.
But that you do. But again, one of the great skills that I've learned, that we learn as creatives or designers, is to be adaptive. That we may solve the problem. I mean, how many times have we done it where we've been given a pitch and here's the brief and we solve the problem, and then when we win the pitch with the solution, we find out that wasn't the real problem and we have to start again.
Yeah.
So we're resilient and we're able to say, if not that, then something else. If not that, then something else. And we're able to adapt and change. And that's the critical thing to success. I mean, there's plenty of sort of, books on adaptive design methodologies that suggest that. Now you can do the methodologies, but the resilience has to happen through experience. And how thick-skinned have you become over the years?
It's kind of like a sink or swim industry at times. So yeah.
But you always swim because, somebody tries to sink you and then you get back up and swim. And that resilience is what keeps you going, and it keeps you going to the end. And I've faced, it's been an interesting journey. I've faced a multitude of setbacks over the course of this, just having to, things like I thought one material would work. Doesn't work. I have to try and find another material. I find an issue with a piece of the design that I have to then adapt the design to kind of solve another problem. The problems come every time you change. You make one decision, it forces another problem to solve.
Yeah.
Now, if you're not ready for that, if you stick with an idea and you will not move and you refuse to kind of adapt, then you'll fail. That's where failure happens. So it's resilience is a killer aspect of being able to kind of be a successful creative, a successful inventor, and actually executing on your ideas.
Not just recently, but you've kind of always kind of make sure to refer to yourself as an inventor and not an entrepreneur. And, there's something that I really kind of, it's obviously, it sticks with you just because of the way it sounds, and it's a really good thing, I think. But you always say you believe in a better way rather than better off. Where does that kind of thinking come from, and why why would you not call yourself an entrepreneur if you're looking to hopefully therefore sell this invention? Why stick to being called an inventor?
Well, I have no issue, don't get me wrong, I have no issue with making money, with earning a living and doing very well out of things, but it goes back to that we talked about, that whole polymath nature. I'm really into economics. Now, it doesn't seem to make sense, creative into economics, but actually I'm a good creative because I'm into all these various things. And
you almost need to be now, though. You need to kind of be a cat of nine tails, and kind of have all those strings to your bow, because otherwise you will sink.
It gives you more influence for the quality of output that you create. So this is an interesting thing about, again, I'm fascinated. I've got loads of heroes from all walks of life. Adam Smith is one of my great heroes. Now, Adam Smith is the father of modern economics, but actually he's hugely misunderstood. And what Adam Smith's real message was that a business or an organization needs to make profit, but not just profit for the sake of profit itself, but because with the profit, you can reinvest and you can improve the quality of your system. And if you kind of do that, then as the system improves, everybody associated with the system improves. So profit is all about reinvesting and reinventing, and that creates a positive cycle. So if you take that perspective with my inhaler business, my inhaler will be, the first version of my inhaler will be, I hope it will work, it will do its job, it will go into the market, and I'll make money from it. I will then reinvest that money in making it a better product and adapting it and finding variables of that product with which to improve the lives of the people that use it, and also the lives of the people who I hope will be working with me. I don't like the word for me, but with me, to actually kind of do that adaptive improvement and innovation, because technically that's innovation. Invention is the creation of a new system. Innovation is the improvement of the component parts of a system.
Right.
A bit of Russ Ackoff there, amazing systems theorist. So does that answer that question?
Yeah, for sure. And just kind of going back, you're talking about when you run into a problem and this material doesn't work and you need to find a new material, then that membrane maybe isn't the right one. How do you know about any of the stuff? Where is it kind of have you just literally had to have the steepest learning curve in the world, or do you have people that help you with that kind of thing? Because fair enough, I'm not asthmatic and I don't have the idea to invent an inhaler, but I wouldn't know where the hell to go. Where do you start?
So there's another great invention that I discovered. It's not my invention, but I discovered it, and it's really fantastic. It's called the internet, and everything is there, all the information you could ever want, and not just there is sort of the internet's great for the base level stuff. You can go to Wikipedia and find out an awful lot of stuff, but actually, what people don't realize is that every academic paper that has ever been written, deeply intellectual content on a specific subject matter is all out there and freely available. So
you basically have the driest internet history.
It's really dull. You wouldn't want to look at my browser history. There's nothing juicy on there except for a certain amount of white powders. But again, I've read so many articles on dry powder pharmacology, on the respiratory nature of the lungs, on the deposition of the lungs, and how drugs go into the bloodstream. But you know what? I'm a bit of a geek. I think you are too. You get into a subject and you want to drill deep, and you go down rabbit holes. And
Yeah,
one minute you're
all in or not at all. Like
exactly. One minute you're looking at human airflow rates, and then it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're doing computational fluid dynamic modeling on everything from the way your blood moves through your veins, the way your air moves through your lungs. It's fascinating. Life's fascinating, but you have to be an interested person. You know?
So now, like, obviously you've had to do a lot of that kind of education yourself, but now, like, with the help of the Scottish Enterprise Grant, how does that all work? Do you now, like, that grant is for you to basically go and pay other people to kind of help you bring it to life?
Yeah.
Like, what's that kind of process like?
That process is very hard. It takes an awful lot of effort. There are forms to be filled. There is
I can imagine a lot of paperwork going
pages
into
and pages of writing to be done to kind of to articulate what it is you're going to do to solve the problem, to make the product feasible. You have to get partners involved. We've got a number of amazing consultants from the respiratory world helping us, and this is the killer bit, is that you can't do these things alone. Like, I had an idea, which is a great idea, but without Lisa, my business partner, without our consultants who are spread around the UK, who have background in pharmacology, in respiratory manufacturing, in business development, in large pharma organizations. I've got product engineering experts. I've got a doctor working on the actual doing experiments in a lab on the actual kind of drug lifting from the membrane. You find the people. And the great thing about Scottish Enterprise was that first of all, they supported us by saying we believe in it, and secondarily by saying we have a range of different grants and support systems available that can point you in the right direction to get what you want. Their research people have been phenomenal. Like, I know the various markets that I can sell my product in eventually, simply because they have a huge network of people doing research and providing me with the knowledge that I have. So how does it happen? You have the idea, you patent the idea and make sure that you have your IP sorted, and then you just put your narrative together and you pitch it. That's what we've done all our careers, right? We pitch. And we know how to
naturally
pitch.
to you, at least, like the kind of marketing of it and actually pitching the idea to people. You're like, well, I've got this.
I would say it's a bit like the Karate Kid. So all those years of advertising, marketing, digital technology, all these various skills that I've got, the storytelling, the design work, it's like the wax on, wax off stuff. When I became an inventor, I was absolutely ready to be an inventor because of all the amazing experiences I've had through this
I can imagine.
previous career.
So, like, as you know, like, another reason that I kind of wanted to get you on, which I'm kind of looking forward to talking about, is because, you're talking about kind of geeking out over things on YouTube, and this is one of the things that I geek out probably most at the moment. It's kind of we both have similar interests, as you said, and with personal development and kind of the work of what I kind of, well, not I call, but many people call, like, modern day philosophers.
Yeah.
The Clay Christensen's, Ray Dalios, Jordan Peterson's. Where did I know where my interest in that kind of came from, but, like, where did your interest in those kind of, modern day philosophers and these amazing genius people of our time kind of come from?
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. I've always been obsessed with heroes, and I think it's because I grew up in urban Newcastle, and there wasn't really access to those type of people that we're talking about there to give you life advice.
Not up here, to be fair.
Anyway, we didn't have
terrible
access
life
to that
advice
stuff
in school, to be fair.
Yeah, and we didn't have access to that kind of knowledge, and that's the beauty of the internet age, is these people can put their messages out, and we can. I think Jordan Peterson himself says that YouTube is actually the next Gutenberg press, and it's actually better because the Gutenberg press was delivered knowledge, but only to people who could read. YouTube delivers knowledge to anybody. As long as you can hear, you can kind of get that information. So it opens up the whole world, and obviously all those people become into your frame of reference. my thing is always that I guess I was always looking for that. I grew up with Star Wars. I was always looking for the Obi-Wan, and actually, as part of that, one of my huge interests is in mythology, and I love Joe Campbell and Jungian psychology and the nature of mythology and how the hero's quest moves and how you there are lessons around history and all the mythology that tell you how to live your life.
What I love about kind of mythology is that, like, no matter the lesson or no matter the story, like, you can take Greek, the story is there. Also, you can get in Tao, you can get, wherever else. Like the stories repeat themselves. Now, really, no matter what literature you kind of read or what mythology you kind of dig into, they're all there. The same lessons, the same stories, just in a different way, shape, or form.
Exactly. And in Joe Campbell's book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is what Lucas based Star Wars, or built the mythology of Star Wars on, shows how even in disparate cultures that never contacted each other throughout history, the fundamental narrative of the hero's quest was the same throughout that. In the Bible as well, I know people think Peterson is a bit too religious, but actually he's just fascinated by the message.
Yeah,
like he always says that it's not an instruction manual.
Yeah.
That's not what the Bible is about. It's
No.
about finding the meaning in the stories.
Yeah, it kind of changed my perspective on it slightly, because I would probably have, well, definitely said that I don't believe in Christianity or anything like that, but like after reading 12 Rules for Life, Peterson's book, like it did change my perspective on it. It not to the point where I would like to read it, but it gave me like a new appreciation for it, because like I would never have maybe read the stories the same way that he interprets them, and like he's very handedly interpreted a lot of them and kind of done it for me and put it into a very easily readable book.
I don't know if you watched his YouTube lectures. I think there's about 18 lectures, about 3 hours each, on the stories of the Bible.
Some of them are fantastic.
It's incredible.
Like that's kind of what I go, some people have their other, kicks, but my YouTube wormhole is usually me sitting in my bed watching like a Jordan Peterson compilation or whatever, very sadly.
Yeah.
And it kind of like, you kind of almost like touched on like a big thing that he discusses a lot of the time, which again, I think he's a really misunderstood person, possibly one of the most misunderstood people on the internet, I suppose. But you're talking about like, being adaptable and adapting to negative situations. And he's very much like, like life is chaos. Life is chaotic. Life is, not a very great place. And that's a very pessimistic way of looking at things. But it's just like you have the ability to completely change the course of that. So how tough are you? Like, like things, you have the ability to kind of improve the terrible, and things are pretty bloody terrible. So like you have the power to do that. And just the kind of way that he looks at things, I just find like fascinating. I could listen to him all day.
Oh, it's utterly inspiring. And it's not the thing that's important for me from that. It's not just one man who's saying, here's my viewpoint. He has taken all the lessons of all the great philosophers and psychologists and historians and pulled them together and made sense of the holistic truth that sits within all those subject matters. That's unbelievable, and to distill that down to a set of rules that ultimately come back to take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
That's what
Stand
it comes
up straight
down to.
with your shoulders back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you talk about that's you sit at home and you go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Some people sit at home and watch EastEnders or Love Island or all this crap that is utterly
melts
meaningful.
your brain.
Yeah. And all this amazing stuff is out there and free and online. And how are you going to improve your life if you're avoiding dealing with the truth of who you are and what you're supposed to be, with the distraction of all the crap that sits there in the world? But I do think it's changing, though. I mean, God, historically, I think we're quite unique, maybe in our industry. Maybe that's doing people an injustice, but I think a lot of people are content in the comfort of the bubble of the industry or the world that they work in. And actually, it's that thing of step 1 foot outside your comfort zone. You're supposed to have, I think Peterson says, you're supposed to have 1 foot in order, 1 foot in chaos.
Yeah.
And you're able to be comfortable in those two scenarios. And only by doing that can you start to understand how to manifest value from the chaos that can improve your comfort zone.
The only way to, enjoy the uncomfortable is to put yourself in it more. The more you seek the uncomfortable, the more you will become comfortable.
Yeah,
At the end
and
of
it
the
builds
day.
that resilience that we talked about before, that gives you the confidence and the faith to go and take a risk by doing a venture, the
Yeah,
kind of thing that I've
because
done.
there's tons of times where you're like doing a pitch or doing whatever it may be, and you know you're sitting there almost kind of having a bit of what you'd maybe call a creative block, going, how the hell am I going to solve this? And then, like, lo and behold, you do arrive at the answer and you do finally get it. And then it's kind of like the Mr. Miyagi thing. Like,
Mhm.
you don't really realize that you're educating yourself about it and you're becoming a better person until the next time you have to deal with a similar scenario. And you're like, I've kind of done this before. Like, I feel comfortable here. I know what's going on, whether it's I've never worked in this industry before, client wise, we get a lot of financial services in Edinburgh. So, like, somebody that we're probably all experts in financial services up here. Somebody that isn't in Edinburgh might not be. So it does just, broaden your horizons a little bit more.
Everyone needs to do it.
Do you have like, I'm, fanboying over Jordan Peterson at the moment quite a lot, but I've also been reading Ray Dalio's book, or listening to Ray Dalio's book on Audible. I can't take things in when I read anymore. That's obviously quite a dense book, but my God, that is a brilliant book. Do you have any other books at the moment, or any kind of people you're geeking out of, or you just kind of keep going back to the same?
Well, I do go back to things, but everything's connected. All these great people, there is so many connections between the messages, and that's why they're great, is because they're discovering the same set of truths, just expressing it in their own voice. Ray Dalio is just a phenomenal guy, absolutely incredible. I keep getting pop-ups on Facebook, because I follow him on Facebook, and I can have a day where, oh God, what am I facing today with this, that, or the other? And Ray Dalio pops up, and that piece of information, that one message, that principle from
number
today,
56 or whatever.
Right, okay, and these people become your heroes and your guides, and it's all part of that mythology. You need them; they're there for a purpose to guide you. The one person who I am obsessed with at the minute is Ian McGilchrist. Do you know who he is?
No.
So Ian McGilchrist is, I think he was a professor of neuropsychology. He lives on the Isle of Skye now, and he's just written a book called The Master and His Emissary. I say just written it; it's about 30 years of his discovery into neuropsychology.
Just chucked it out there.
Yeah, and it's a thick volume, and it's very hard to get through, but ultimately it's the most fascinating book I've ever read. And all those messages that we get from Peterson, going back through all the great philosophers of history, to the even the structures of the books about creativity that we read to get inspiration from, that help us understand the processes of better creative thinking. Everything is in this book about neuropsychology. The Master and His Emissary is about the two hemispheres of the brain and the way they work together, and how there's a deeper philosophical message in it around how we need to, again, find more meaning in life rather than just find more stuff. And ultimately, the message in Ian McGilchrist's book is that we don't really we mistake how the brain works. We think left right means more creative, more functional, and it's not at all. One hemisphere is fundamentally responsible for focusing on explicit information, and one hemisphere is focused on taking that explicit information and making it implicit. So taking the detail and finding the meaning. And where I find it fascinating is that if you think about the way we consider types of people we meet, so creative people, right? Creative people are all meaning, and they're a bit sort of, they ebb and flow from one sentiment and thought to another, and they don't focus well.
Yeah.
Whereas when you think of more very businessy people, they tend to be very focused. So if you think about that idea that one side of the brain is more focused on explicit information, and that comes back to us, our animal history, as we are both predator and prey. So if we're predatory, we're focused explicitly on one thing. If you're looking at the rabbit that you're going to take down as a fox, you're absolutely focused on that one thing, and you're in predatory mode. But as a prey, you have to kind of pull back from that explicit vision and see the bigger picture around you. look at the trees, look at the forest, look at the grass, look in the distance, look at the weather, and you're constantly evaluating what this whole scenario means to you in terms of your vulnerability. So you go from predatory to prey mode. And actually, prey mode allows you to kind of understand the wider world. Predatory mode allows you to attack and get what you want.
Yeah.
And you move between those states. So as creative people, we take in a lot of explicit detail, and then we sit back and we think about it and we find the meaning in it. And to me, that's why we see more entrepreneurial people as explicitly focused on the end goal. And we see more inventor people looking at the breadth of possible solutions and the real connection between all the explicit information to find a solution. And they're generally a bit more passive. Creative people you could consider a bit more passive, whereas a more kind of entrepreneurially business-like person would be more focused and more aggressive. And so the ability to move between those states is what defines us as good creatives. Sometimes we need to look for the meaning. Sometimes we need to focus explicitly on the goal.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating.
Honestly, it's a rabbit hole that if you go
Is
down,
that a big book?
yeah, you might need a few weeks off work because it takes up a lot of brain space.
Well, I've got a long commute to and from work, which gets me through Audible, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Like touching on kind of, I suppose, just while we're on the subject of creatives, creative thinking, problem solving, or the creative problem solving, has never really been in like such a huge demand, I suppose, or like, one of the kind of design leaders that I kind of listen to, talks about like design is having a moment, so to speak, and creativity is having a moment. And now, obviously you had many, many years as a successful creative director, but then almost at the kind of peak of creativity and design being very popular and kind of getting embedded in businesses that you never thought we would be able to, you left. So I was just kind of wondering, like, obviously I know you had your invention, so that was a driving factor, but was there like a tipping point or, warning signs for you personally that just you didn't like what you see? Because obviously the lure of the invention idea pulled you away, was stronger than the lure of still being a creative director.
Well, again, it's part of that journey of life, isn't it? When I was about 14, 15, I did a work experience. I was very lucky in Newcastle. I got work experience in a little sort of studio agency. And I met an amazing guy called Eric Hall, who's now a friend on Facebook. We only reconnected recently, who gave me a blank piece of paper and a brief and said, there you go, solve that problem, create an advert. And I was looking for the rules. I said, well, how do I do that? He said, well, you'll know. You try different things, try different solutions and see what works best. And that absolutely inspired me. And I just knew I wanted to work in advertising at that point. But I always said to myself, it's not just the working in advertising. I want to be one of these creative directors. I want to be the guy at the top of the tree. I want to kind of get to that. That was my horizon. And you've got to be careful what you wish for in life, because you achieve your goals and you don't keep moving. You've got then. Well, yeah. Then once you get there, it starts to go downhill. You hit the top of the hill, and you realize actually there's some other hills I can see. And so part of it was about pushing myself and really wanting to take it further. It wasn't just wrapping my creativity around other people's businesses, but doing the core concepts myself. But also there was an innate responsibility that perhaps the ideas I have could deliver greater value globally than just to improve somebody's marketing or someone's digital presence or some other aspect of a business. Yeah.
Well, you probably can.
My inhaler the life it saves could be my own,
Wow.
But it could save other lives. Now, that's a massive opportunity.
But not even asthmatics, as you say. Like, it could be, like, God, like, how far can you go? Like, any medicine that can become a dry powder, potentially, has humongous potential. Like,
exactly.
Everything. Is that, like, does that, like, it must be, I'm sure it's obviously very exciting because you've got an invention that does have potential like that. But is it also kind of like, I don't know, like what I'm trying to say, like almost like a bit of like a oh fuck moment, like quite scary at the same time? Like
a little bit. But here's the thing that really kind of gets me, right, is that I'm inspired by people like Elon Musk here. And one of my heroes is a guy called Richard Buckminster Fuller. And these are guys who are going, you know what? Inventing saves the world. Inventing solves problems. Now we've got a massive problem as a species at the minute that we have one planet We're messing it up, and there's more and more of us every day.
Yeah.
Now we need to solve that problem. But you know what? We have evolved through the brain that we have. Like I was saying, with this brain is designed to understand the problem, identify the explicit needs, and then find an implicit solution to that need, and then be able to execute on it. So we've created a problem, and we're problem solvers. And it's only, I think, by people like us who've learned to be very creative and very adaptive and problem solvers to go out and solve more of the world's problems. And that was part of the inspiration for me doing that. Now, you know what? Maybe I'll launch an inhaler. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. Maybe further down the line, I'd quite like to kind of try my hand at a tidal energy turbine for free energy. Maybe it'll work. Maybe
As
it'll
you
work.
do as
But
well,
my
in the same way
intention,
that you invent an inhaler.
exactly, my intention is right, because my intention is about finding a better way. And as a result of finding a better way, somewhere down the line, better off should come. You know. So back to the question: why give it all up? Because there's something better to do with what I've become.
Wow. And like, you hear a lot of stories, like, you know, whether it's on podcasts or YouTube videos or just these annoying like pre-rolls on YouTube of like, you know, entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, inventors like yourself, like failing tons. Like, you know, this famous Edison quote that he made.
Yeah.
There wasn't like, you know, 1,000 attempts at the light bulb. It was like 1,000 lessons, so to speak. Like, and obviously you had a lot of success as a creative director, and now it seems like your first, you know, you've landed. Well, like, maybe I don't know the full story, but like, you know, your first invention, like, I'm sure there's plenty of inventors whose their first invention ended up being absolute shit.
Yeah.
But your first invention has global potential to
Yeah.
potentially
Yeah.
change the world, potentially. So that must be quite scary in itself. Like, you know, you've uncovered something that's incredibly powerful. So I was kind of wondering, do you, you know, with that kind of pressure, I suppose, on yourself, do you kind of suffer from like an imposter syndrome? Like, how the hell did I manage to create something like this? Like, am I that person that, you know, could potentially be the next kind of Elon Musk, or kind of go down in the history books as the guy that managed to help get medicines into third world countries, or, you know, cure asthma, and, you know, whatever it might be?
It's an interesting question, but ultimately that comes back to much of the learning that you and I were talking about before, of the likes of Peterson. Do you know, all I'm trying to do is take responsibility for myself and go, well, what can I contribute to something that is greater than myself, finding something more meaningful than just myself to look after. And as a result of that, I'm going to try. And I'll try, and there might be setbacks. I mean, you know, I probably won't fail because I've learned how to not fail. I spent a lifetime developing ideas that work. And the model, I've done modeling on this. It's all on my website. They call it concept theory. It's all about how the brain works, how the process works, how the evaluation model works, to make sure that you're creating a valuable idea. I don't believe that fail fast stuff. That's a scam, by the way. That all comes from an investment industry whose model is all about an acceptable failure rate based on an acceptable rate of return.
Yeah.
Now, if you're an
Dalio
investment
kind of
syndicate,
debunks it as well.
Exactly.
Like, you know, none of these investors are, you know, using Ray Dalio and the Warren Buffetts of the world as an example, but none of these guys just like stumble upon like a 2 billion Netflix, you know, profit on their stock on Netflix or something like that. Like, they make sure that they have plenty of upside with the most limited amount of risk as well. But, you know, a lot of people do that, but then they paint the picture that, oh, I failed all the time. I failed like constantly to kind of get here. And there's maybe, yes, you maybe have, but it doesn't outweigh the amount of kind of, you know, positives and kind of growth you have. And
you know why failure happens is because of the cognitive biases people have, that they're not honest with themselves. So again, we come back to the heroes, the things that we learn about, the polymaths in us. I love Danny Kahneman. And I love the whole concept, you've read the book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and the work he did with his partner, Amos Tversky, understanding the cognitive biases that incline us to make the wrong choices and the wrong decisions. And actually, when you eliminate those biases and you understand them, Ray Dalio is great at that, you start to know how to be honest with yourself so that you avoid failure. Failure happens because you're not honest about something that's usually sitting there looming in the background.
And you can always know it's kind of peering over your shoulder.
Confirmation bias, exactly. So, so do you know what I come back and mention all my heroes. The Kipling poem If. There's a great line in there about if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same, because they're born of the same intent. If you try your best and you fail, you tried your best. The point was to try your best and do the thing. If you succeed, the point was you tried your best. It doesn't matter. And I always said that when we were pitching. I always thought I never cared whether we won or lost a pitch, because I knew that every time we pitched, we'd done the best possible job we could do. Now, you know what? If somebody else came up with something left field that we hadn't thought of, fine. Did we do what we had to do? Did we put our best foot forward? Was our intention right? Yeah. And that's all that matters. If we won it, great. If we didn't win it, couldn't care less. If I enjoyed it and I believed in it, that's all that matters.
That's the kind of important thing. And you always know, like, I always find a lot with pitching to clients that in the back of your mind, don't get me wrong, there's obviously some pitches where you're like, I thought that went really well. Then all of a sudden you get the feedback, and then, you know, not only are you didn't win it, but you're like the bottom rung of the agencies that pitched up against you or whatever like that, and that can be a real blow sometimes. But I think there is a bit in you that you do know when you, like, we won that, and we did really well. Or, you know, you kind of walk out and you're like, that was a half-baked idea or a half-baked delivery, or maybe we just didn't read the room right, or, you know, whatever it might be. But, like, I always say, like, you know, trust your gut. Your gut always, you know, your gut always tells you the right thing. That feeling in your gut, like, the rest of you can lie to yourself and kind of, you know.
But your gut gets better with experience, and that's the thing. I always used to think pitching, it's like going to war. As a creative director, pitching is going to war. You're going into the arena, testing your skills against your competition, and hopefully winning that battle and bringing home the spoils of war, and proving that the effort you've put in and the skills that you've acquired have made you such a master that you can beat the competition.
Like you touched on earlier, when you're about, I think you said when it was 13 or 14 years old and you kind of got your apprenticeship, that's kind of when you realized you wanted to work in advertising. But
it was just a work experience. It makes it sound like Victorian times that I was an apprentice at 13 years old.
What did you want to be when you were, like, you know, from like when you grew up? Like, what did you want to be, like, before you realized you wanted to be a creative director or work in advertising? Like, was it something silly, or was it?
No, I had no idea. All I knew was I grew up in a city in Newcastle where what I was observing around me didn't seem to fit whatever it was in me that had a need to express itself. And I would say, I mean, I went to work with my old man from being a kid doing horrible, dirty jobs. I put in the manual labor before I ever got into the workforce. And I had a Saturday job in a butcher's shop when I was 14 to when I was 16. I know what real hard physical work is like. And so I think I knew what it was like to do that kind of labor. Yeah. And I wanted to not have to do it. Yeah. And I wanted to use my mind. And something in me said my mind has some capacity which it doesn't seem to be used for. So when I got that outlet in that work experience in that little creative agency,
so how did that come about then? Like,
it was because, well, so the first work experience, I said I wanted to do something design because I loosely thought there was a world of design, and they gave me a work experience in a place called the Riverside nightclub in Newcastle. Basically,
a nightclub.
Yeah, a nightclub, pressing the button on the photocopier to make flyers, and that was supposed to be design. Wow. So my mom, being my mom, I came home and told her this. She just marched me down to the school, banged on the window of the kind of reception of the school, and said to the lady there, "He's not standing in a nightclub. This isn't helping him at all." And the lady inside said, "No, you're absolutely right." And she, I think it was either her husband or somebody close, worked in that agency. She made a call, and the next day got me in there, and it was the most serendipitous thing that's ever happened to me. I was about to
say, like, I love hearing stories like that where, like, if that one thing didn't happen, then
I might have been a butcher.
Who knows? Who knows? Like, kind of what you would have ended up being. Like, I remember,
what's yours?
Like mine. Like, I kind of won the lottery, I suppose, in terms of, like, you know, parents and grandparents. But, like, I was sitting with my granddad, and my granddad, he worked for Castro for many,
Mm-hmm.
many years, but he was also an incredible artist and like amazing paintings and everything that he used to do. And he always used to also, when he was babysitting, it was never just like him sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
We're always making some stupid stop motion film or something like that, made out of like pipe cleaners and all this kind of stuff. And he basically, there was a competition on Rice Krispies box that was like, if you design our new Rice Krispies box, then you could win. At the time, it was like one of those like translucent power books or mat books or whatever they were called back in the time. And like I was something like 8 years old. I had like no way of ever winning that stuff because I'm going to be doing it with crayons, and I'm sure some other people that are entering are actually designing things. But you turn the box inside out, and then he's like, right, design a new box. And obviously as a kid, you're just like doing the most maddest shit on the box as you can imagine, and just kind of like doing it randomly. And then I had so much fun with it. He was just like, oh, you should totally kind of consider, like, you can do design, this is like a job. And I was like, like, what do they call people that do this? And he was like, I'm pretty sure they're called like graphic designers and things like that. And then being a really good grandparent, he then got me like books on graphic design, and he was telling me stories that, if there was ever like a story, I remember, I don't know why this sticks out, but I remember like there was been like a newspaper clipping that he got me that was like the company or agency that had rebranded Kit Kat.
Mm-hmm.
The ludicrous amount of money they got paid, and that was the kind of hoo-ha in the newspaper about it. It was millions of pounds for the new Kit Kat logo, and all they had done was put like the word Kit Kat in an oval, and it was like, obviously that's not what they just did, but that's how the paper paints it. And I was like, wow, I can get paid like millions of pounds for doing a logo, and like thinking it like that's what's going to happen. And then it was so funny. Like I was chatting about this at work the other day with someone, but like when I said I wanted to be that, I wanted to be a graphic designer. It was in my head. Like I wanted to go to art school and do that. I remember getting, your Career Scotland seminar, and you sit down with the guy, and he tells you, and he literally tried to tell me not to do it, and like have you considered engineering and things like that? And I was like, well, no, because like I want to do this. Like, so can I do this? And then it was just, I couldn't believe that he actually got talked off the ledge of doing it. But like, had my granddad not got me to draw a new Rice Krispies box, I mean, like the
these
actual
are critical
result,
moments in anybody's life. And I was one of the other I can't remember which book it is, but in Joe Campbell's kind of back catalogue of books and podcasts, he talks about the concept of the second father, where, do you know this one? Where we all have our father, and in the ideal world, not everybody is lucky enough to have this, but your father brings you up from the start to the point of maturity. So your dad teaches you the main essence things. I mean, gender politics, all that, and with Peterson and that stuff. But a parental father role actually kind of shows you how to be respectful and conscientious and hardworking and caring and kind and all these various things, and how to look after yourself. But quite often, your father is not necessarily the one that inspires you at that moment of maturity to be something beyond who you were as a child. And this is the Kenobi figure. It happens throughout history. For you, probably your granddad.
Absolutely.
For me, it was this guy, Eric Hall, amazing guy. And they trigger something in you that goes, here's what I could be as a mature adult. And when you're inspired like that, I mean, it happens. Kids young men go into the army. This is why you give such great motivation. The Jocko Willink thing. You go into the army and you meet your drill sergeant, and you know what? He's inspiring. He's everything. He represents everything that you could be, and you're inclined to kind of push yourself harder as a result. It happens in all walks of life. It happens. Forget the kind of like father figure. It happens to a lot of women as well. Yeah. Your mother brings you up to a certain point, and then you find another inspirational figure, and they trigger something in you which makes you go further. And actually, the point of education should not be it should be to fill you with a certain amount of capability to move into the world. But unless you're placed in those situations, and as many of those as possible, to find the thing that's going to trigger you. Yeah. That's why a lot of people just don't end up where they should be in life, because they never
had that second figure. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, like my, dad is a great role model for many other different reasons, but in terms of the kind of creative angle, like he works in the oil industry, so that was never going to happen. Like, and then I think my granddad just, I think with all grandparents, they obviously try and kind of like boost your hobbies or
Nurture,
like
yeah.
whatever they'll try and test almost like what you're interested in. For him and my brother, like, my brother showed an interest in like kind of more kind of sports and things like that. So like, got the golf membership and all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And I had no interest in that. I was face in
Yeah.
a sketch pad drawing stuff and, like doodling away. And he obviously being a kind of, amateur artist to himself, he just kind of spotted that evidently. I don't think he ever realized that,
That's
but
amazing. But do you know what?
it's these little stories that I love.
That, you do your work still with the college, right?
Yeah.
Now, for somebody, you're going to be that. Now, imagine the fucking responsibility that gives you, and how amazing it is to have that opportunity. Now, I find it. I find it quite. I've always been quite focused on doing what I want to do and stuff, and I'm always very humbled. I'm not. I mean, I played up to the role of egomaniac creative director when I was a creative director because you need to, and it worked for me. But I'm not really that egomaniacal. But when I hear what you say it to me, other people say it to me that I inspired them or I made a difference, and I maybe triggered something in their career. There's kids who came out of Napier when I used to do stuff there, who now creative directors who still I get messages from that say that was fuck, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And there.
But if you get told it at the time, you probably wouldn't believe it, nor would you like almost accept it either, or like it wouldn't work like that. If it's almost just like the kind of Mr. Miyagi thing again, like it's one of these things that you don't realize. I've obviously worked with Edinburgh College for a number of years now, and who knows, maybe I have been that person for some people, maybe I haven't, but I won't find out obviously until they give you a message or something like that later on in life, or they're looking for a job. But like if you get told that at the start, you'd be like, no, don't be daft kind of thing, and you kind of have to kind of show a side of humility about it.
There's the whole creative journey. Forget about the specifics of kind of, you did this bit of work or that bit of work. The creative journey is on you. It's the emergence of the self. It's that self-actualization thing that Jung talks about, becoming something worthwhile and meaningful in the world. And that's being creative, not changing, not improving, not developing all the time. That's the kind of person who is not creative.
Yeah.
But everyone has that capacity. It's just whether you can find the trigger to kind of do it.
Yeah. You recently did a TED Talk down, where was it again? Sorry?
In Tunbridge Wells, yeah.
And it was basically like your story about kind of becoming an inventor. And it's on YouTube if you want to go and see it. Just type in Don Smith TEDx. I'm sure it'll come up.
Yeah, the title of it is An Idea Is Not Enough.
And a couple of questions about that, just because obviously, like, again, I'm sure both of us have spent many hours on the TED website, losing hours of your day listening to Dan Pink or whoever it may be. Kind of, I suppose, firstly, like, what was it like getting the opportunity to do TED, and then now your talk is a TED Talk on the TED website, and I'm sure people all around the world have probably watched it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And then also, how did that kind of opportunity come about?
So it came about because my brother, who is also a creative director in a design agency, he did one 2 years ago, and his was, it's incredible. It's all about the conditions for creativity, and he was identifying that where we grew up in Newcastle, that there were three sort of core components: adversity, diversity, and advocacy. Which were elements of our upbringing, which actually kind of catapulted us into a world where we wanted to express ourselves and find a release for that creativity.
I'll have to
and
go
again,
and watch that one.
His is, I think his is called The Conditions for Creativity. Again, it's on the TEDx website. It's wonderful. And so the organizers, Glenn's close to the organizers, and they knew about my journey, and so he'd suggested, so that came about. But it was just an amazing thing to do. And honestly, like, you watch it back, I did okay. Right? I did okay. I stood and I presented and I went through everything. I didn't think that was going to happen. I mean, I had a certain amount of confidence.
What do you think was not going to happen? Sorry.
I thought I would and and lose my place and forget my flow, and just the overwhelming nature of 1,000 people in an auditorium
Having to stand in a red circle.
And it was really hard. And so I did a first run through in the morning. Everyone gets there early and does a run through to an empty room.
Okay.
And I did that. I stumbled and I fell and I forgot my lines. And the empty room was horrible because you're just speaking into a space, and it was, and I really, that was the worst part of it. I hated it. And I was on
You'd
last.
probably almost be better off not doing that bit, just doing it live, like
which I always said that's the way to do pitches. Don't rehearse.
Yeah.
I always say don't rehearse. Know that you know it.
Yeah.
Get in there, do it. So I tried the rehearsal. I had to do it as part of the because they have to check that you're not
some Joe Blow.
So I did that, and I spent the whole day waiting. I was on second last.
Oh God, that would have been so worse as well. Waiting.
I paced, and I came on, and the weirdest thing happened, right? And nobody can understand this unless they've done this. You walk out, you've been introduced, you're on the red spot, and you speak, and that crowd, that 1,000 people crowd, is clapping, and they're warm, yeah. And I made a little joke at my brother's expense, awfully, because he's one of the best people in the world, my brother. But I felt I needed to make a joke just to break the ice. And as I did, the warmth that came at me from that crowd, and I couldn't see them because I was sort of spotlit, so all I could hear was this vibration and this noise, but it was just pure human warmth. And something about that just makes you fine. And it must be that feeling a stand-up comedian gets when they're out and they get that first laugh.
That first laugh.
Right. Everybody's with me here. And so I just went through it, and I flowed, and I got it, and I was impressed with myself that I could do it like that.
It must have been so nerve-wracking.
It was. So shall I tell you something that only I think 2 people actually know?
Hopefully.
So the anxiety and the stress that built up throughout the course of that day resulted in me getting a hemorrhoid the following morning.
Really?
That's what that stress did to me. Yeah, went away pretty fast. But I was like, wow, that's a fantastic manifestation of anxiety.
You get that in pitches as well, though. Sometimes there's been big pitches that I've done where I've literally come out, and then it's kind of like the adrenaline dump. The adrenaline disappears from you, and then you kind of go
you crash.
Wow, I feel knackered. I feel like I can't go. But
that's what I said before. You go into battle, and you go in, and you take one foot out of chaos and put it out of order and put it into chaos, and you have to deal with it, man. You have to live up to your own expectations. And that's the test everybody needs to put themselves
Did you
through.
say you can't see because there's obviously just a spotlight in you, so your eyes can't adjust to actually seeing? So it must be quite weird because you don't get a vibe of whether it's going well or not well.
Well, you do, though. You do because you feel it. And I can't explain it, but you feel it. You just know. The murmurs, the little laughs, you can sense it. It's a fascinating experience.
It's also I suppose, I'm maybe going to be slightly biased towards you, but talking about an invention as well, I'm sure everybody kind of does that when you must get it. When everybody, what do you do? And you say you're an inventor, everyone must it's such a cool thing to be able to say.
Yeah.
I mean, they have no idea what you've invented yet, but it's probably something interesting at least. So they probably do that lean forward.
I think there was a bit of that, especially as I got to the point where I was explaining the potential for the device and how it could genuinely save lives all around the world. I think there's an honesty in that people really responded well to.
And what was I going to say? In the I think it's at the start of the TED Talk, you talk about the kind of 4 different areas that your kind of invention practice kind of looks at. Do you mind kind of just giving a bit of a rundown of what they are and why? Not to spoil the TED Talk, still go and watch it, it's very good. But
so it's based on, I said earlier, one of my heroes, Richard Buckminster Fuller, famous American inventor. He in his final book, which is called Critical Path, he talks about humans needing to be inventive in 4 specific areas to create sustainable life going forward. And those 4 are health, energy, environment, and interstellar space travel. The first 3 are primarily about sustainable life on the planet. And the last one is to get something ready to get us the fuck out of here if we really mess up the first 3. And I love that. I thought that's so true. There's your and if you think that's Elon Musk is looking at those things, because he's probably aware
Thingy
of the same
Bezos
thing.
as well. He's like
Bezos,
Amazon are at it as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's something interesting about that idea that, like, I anybody who does anything valuable or meaningful can, to come back to the Peterson stuff, find what's meaningful, not what's expedient. And your meaningful could be, there's a guy next door who is disabled. I'm going to take him out once a week and I'm going to make his life better. It could be, I'm going to save humanity from itself. The point is to find that meaningful thing.
Yeah, whatever it is for you.
It's not that you get, no altruism is truly selfless, but by being responsible for yourself, you can take responsibility for others and take responsibility beyond that. So that idea of focusing my invention in those 4 areas is my purpose. Now, the first is health, obviously. I've already got a sketchbook full of ideas, especially in tidal energy. I'm really fascinated by tidal energy and just the volume of kinetic energy that sits in the oceans that's untapped. And I don't necessarily think that the tidal energy industry has explored enough options out of their field of reference, their familiarity, to really kind of start to explore what's possible there.
So like, where can people find out more about like your invention practice and like what you do and like, your philosophy and things like that?
Cool. So most of it is there on my website, which is just inventdisrupt.com, just the 2 words and then .com. And my models are on there. Also a bit of information about the inventions and also about some of the consulting I do on invention and innovation, trying to help other people both educate themselves to be better at it, but also to help organizations of all types actually kind of create more positive outcomes in what they do. I'm also on Medium, which is just Don Smith Bloom. Bloom has the numerals 100 in the middle of that. I thought it was clever when I started off. My company's called 100 Flowers, and I thought I'll get bloom.com.
Why 100 flowers?
But it's an old, well, it was used by Mao in the Cultural Revolution, but it's an ancient Taoist line from a poem that just goes, "Let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend." And it's based on that sort of Taoist principle that change is the only constant and ideas are the only unlimited resource.
Well, that seems like a perfect way to wrap up if there ever is any. So I just personally, this is obviously the first episode of the podcast. There'll hopefully be many, many more. There will be many, many more, I promise. But thank you for being the first ever guest on the show. It does actually mean a lot to me, and we'll hopefully get you back on in the future to hear more about your inhaler, how that's doing, as well as any other kind of crazy ideas that you've come up with in the meantime. But in the meantime, folks, please head over to the Method in the Madness website, which is www.themitmpodcast.com. That's www.themitmpodcast.com, and find out a bit more about the show and about myself and where you can find all the episodes. And of course, please head over to your favorite podcast platforms, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, TuneIn, whatever. Hit the subscribe or follow button to make sure you get notified about when new episodes go up. And while you're there, please leave a review. Like, personally, I would really love to hear what people think about each individual episodes or the show in itself, but it also helps bring other people into the show and kind of spread the word of the show as well. So that's it from us here. So Don, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. It was very meaningful for me too.
And everyone else, I hope you found some method in the madness.